This is Tel with Oshawa Bushcraft. I'm back out here today because I have a project I've been working on for you guys for some time, and I'm excited that I finally get to show it to you. I am not so old that I've forgotten about what it was like starting out as a backcountry camper or a bushcrafter, and because of that, I'm empathetic towards some of our young members that are starting out and some of the tribulations they're going through. One of the problems I recall Jordan and I dealing with back in the day was finding a good winter sleep system. A sleeping bag that is rated for the kind of temps we see here in the winter, that is light enough to be carried in the backcountry, can be extremely expensive. So just like somebody starting out today, it was difficult for us at that time to justify spending a lot of money on a piece of gear we might only use once or twice a year. A question I've been asked several times over the years, especially since releasing my last video, is would a single down bag from the Canadian Forces sleep system make a good winter sleeping bag? The answer to that question is going to be maybe. If you call around to a few surplus stores, you could usually find one that'll be happy to sell you a single bag by itself between $40 and $80, the reasonable price for one in good shape. The problems you're going to run into trying to use one of these bags by themselves is that for our climate here, you're going to want to add a warm fleece liner to it to be warm enough. And that fleece liner could weigh between 1 and 2 pounds, and these bags already weigh 5 pounds. So you put that together, you're at 7 pounds, which is a reasonable weight, but it's a little bit heavy for the backcountry. So ideally, we would prefer one of these to be a little bit lighter and a little bit warmer. And that's the two shortcomings we're trying to address in this project. I'm going to get this camera moved around and I'm going to show you guys what I came up with. To start this project, you're going to need to find a few things. The first thing on your list is a single Canadian Forces sleeping bag. Now you can find an inner or an outer, it's not going to matter. I would not spend more than $60 on a single bag. If you hunt around, you can do much better than that. The surplus store here in Oshawa sells rough bags for as little as $40. In the past, I've found bags with broken zippers for as little as $15. And we're not going to use this zipper anyway, so that's a good option for you. As you're calling around, ask them if they'll sell you a bag with a broken zipper and how cheap you can get it. The other items you're going to need for this project are a needle and thread, some kind of a fabric repair tape like tenacious tape. These bags can be kind of hard to color match, so if you want it to look good, you probably want to just buy the clear. And the last item you're going to need is something for cutting stitching. They make a tool they'll sell at the sewing store called a seam ripper or a thread ripper. Failing that, you can use just a very sharp knife, like a hobby knife, like an X-Acto knife, or a scalpel. Once we have all the parts we need, the next step is going to be to completely deconstruct this bag. We're going to remove everything from it we don't need, leaving us with just the down itself and the nylon shell. And we're going to start with the zipper. Even if the zipper on your bag is in good shape, you're going to want to remove it anyway. The ones the Army uses are made out of solid brass. They weigh half a pound, and that's way too heavy for our uses. So what you're going to want to do is go to the end of the zipper, pull it back away from the nylon body, and get in there and start cutting the stitching. And just cut the stitching to cut the zipper away from the body. You don't want to cut into any nylon while you do this. Just work your way all the way down the zipper and all the way up the other side. Remove it from the body first. So as you remove the other half of the zipper, you're also going to be removing the draft tube. They were sewn in together. We do want to remove that, but hang on to both of these parts. We might need them later. Once you have the zipper and the draft tube removed, you want to remove this piece of webbing at the bottom of the zipper and then continue removing this seam from the bottom of the zipper all the way down the side of the bag and along the bottom. While you still have the thread ripper handy, you want to go ahead and remove every little piece of webbing you can find anywhere on this bag. Again, not cutting into the bag, just cutting the threads, but remove all of these little parts and the tie-outs at the bottom, but hang on to them. We might need them for another project. The last bit of deconstruction we're going to have to deal with on these bags is the drawstring at the neck. Now, I refer to this as a drawstring, but it really isn't. There is a channel sewn in the tops of these bags, but the Army put a solid cloth strap in here and stitched it in. So these are not adjustable at all and they're not stretchy. To make matters worse, this particular bag looks like it was damaged somewhere along the line and some soldier did a field repair with a bit of paracord. So this part's up to you guys, but I think you're going to want to remove all the stitching from the inside of this tube and pull that cloth tape out of there to make a proper drawstring tube. This is where you're going to need that needle and thread. You may need to reinforce the ends of this where we remove the stitching. I hope you guys understood the deconstruction process okay. I did my best to illustrate it here out in the field. If you have any questions about it, please post them up in the comments. I'll get back to you. Or again, jump in the Oshawa Bushcraft Facebook group and start a conversation about it. So if everything's been working right so far, you should be looking at your sleeping bag laid out flat, just the nylon shell and the goose down. And you should have removed a brass zipper and a bunch of tie-outs and a draft tube. Now, my bag came to me very weathered from the local surplus store. It only weighed 4.6 pounds, which is a bit light for a CF sleeping bag. Once I removed all of this, I got it down to 3.5 pounds, which is a savings of just a hair over a pound, which is a pretty significant weight savings considering it didn't cost us anything. I've spent a lot of money to shave 1 pound out of my ruck before. Our next step is going to be able to take your tenacious tape or whatever repair tape you bought and repair any damage we found on the bag. With all those seams we removed, you find little bits of down sneaking out, any little holes anywhere, get a patch on all of those. Once you get all those holes repaired, the next step is you're going to want to wash this thing. Whether it's visibly dirty or you just don't know where it's been, it's probably a good idea to wash it. So the nice thing about the CF using 2 smaller bags instead of 1 big one is they're very easy to launder at home. They will fit in your home machine. Especially, this is why we waited till we opened it up, because it tumbles and it washes much better as a quilt as opposed to in the bag shape. If you have an older bag like mine, and maybe it isn't as lofty as it could be, I do recommend you find a wash like Nick Wax, specifically for down products. It does really help, makes a big difference in restoring the loft in them. Buy whatever product you like, wash it by the directions on the bottle. Now that we got it washed, let's take a look at what we got. Now I want you guys to keep in mind, depending on if you started with an inner or an outer bag, your size could vary by a few inches. And depending on when your bag was made, there could be some variation in the manufacture. As well, I had a little bit of damage on the one side of mine, which I had to remove. Your measurements might be slightly different than mine. So as my quilt sits right now, it is 75 inches long, it is 60 inches across the top, and 36 inches across the bottom. Makes it just a hair smaller than a Ranger blanket. My bag came out at 3.5 pounds. We could estimate that the downfill in it weighs between 2 and 2.5 pounds. To put those numbers in context, if I wanted to buy them goose down in the nylon to make one of these myself, the down alone would cost me hundreds of dollars. Furthermore, if you look at companies that manufacture custom quilts with materials and dimensions similar to this quilt could cost you $500. So far, I've only invested about $40 and about 2 hours of my time. What you turn around and do with this from here is going to be totally up to you guys. You get to modify this to suit whatever role you want it to do. Now, I brought 2 examples out here today. I'm going to show you what we did with them. This one's obviously mine. Another one was made by one of our members. We both had different ideas about how to deploy this. So on my quilt, I wanted the ability to use it like a sleeping quilt in cold weather, but I also wanted the ability to be able to lay it out like a Ranger blanket to make it more of a multi-use item. So I accomplished this by installing a paracord drawstring in the tubing at the neck, and by sewing in a drawstring at the foot that would let me shape it into the shape of a foot box. I also reused some of the tie-outs that I removed earlier by sewing them in at the bottom of the bag so that I could tie up the foot box behind my lower legs. In the DIY community, they've come up with a ton of other options. Sometimes people install a short length of zipper behind the legs. Sometimes they use snaps or small buckles or other types of clips. Sometimes they add attachment points like clips or buckles that attach to your sleeping pad to keep the drafts out. Sometimes they add a little strap that goes in behind your neck so you don't get a draft at the neck. I mean, your options are endless. How you build your quilt is totally up to you. This quilt was built by one of our members, Justin, and he was gracious enough to lend it to me for this video. Now, he had no interest in leaving his open to use it like a Ranger blanket, so he left the foot box sewn together. And he did remove that heavyweight zipper. He removed all the excess webbing he's not going to need, and instead he improvised a drawstring at the neck using shock cord. So you guys might be asking right now how these bags are warmer than the sleeping bag as it came. And to kind of understand that, you got to look at how quilts theoretically work. In that, when you're normally laying in one of these bags, you're laying on top of between 30 and 50% of the goose down. And when your body weight compresses that down, it's not actually giving you any insulative value. So up to half of these bags are going to waste, half the insulation in them. So by using it as a quilt, you're forcing all that down, that insulation up on top of you where it is valuable. So theoretically, these should be more insulative than the bags were. I'm sure somebody in the comments section is going to pipe up and ask about comparing this to an Army Ranger blanket. So while we're right here, let's do that now. This is my US Army surplus Ranger blanket that I bought almost 20 years ago when I was in the Army, because at the time, the Canadian Army didn't issue one. So I liked my Ranger blanket. I've taken it all over the place with me, but it is not comparable to a goose down quilt. This is a single layer of nylon or polyester insulation, whereas this is 2 to 2.5 pounds of goose down. So in this part of the world, we can get frost as late as the end of May and as early as mid-August. And I don't feel confident using a Ranger blanket as a sleep system in those kind of conditions, which means I'm only using this as my primary sleep system, maybe 8 or 10 weeks a year. It means the other 40 weeks of the year, I'm going to be using my quilt. I've already given you guys the dimensions and the weight of my quilt, but I'm sure guys are going to want to know about what kind of size it packs up to. So for context, this is the size of my Ranger blanket when it's packed. What do we call that? Football sized? Okay, this is my quilt going into an actual compression sack. So I just, by hand, shoved in a compression sack. That's probably a 20-liter sack, and I haven't actually compressed it down yet. So fully compressed, I'd call that 10 or 12 liters now maybe. I could probably get a little more out of it if I really wanted to. That's pretty good for a winter quilt. So this has been our little talk about how to take an existing Canadian Forces surplus sleeping bag and modify it into a multi-use cold weather quilt that we call the Commando Quilt. Once again, I got to give you guys a little disclaimer here, where I am not claiming that I ever served in any of Canada's commando regiments or that our commandos ever used this piece of kit. We're using that term just to imply that we improvised or modified an existing piece of equipment. I put this same disclaimer in the Commando Ruck tutorial video I made last spring, but I got a lot of hate mail after that one anyway. If you haven't seen that video yet, I'm going to link to it up here. As far as the availability of these bags, like I told you guys in the video on the Canadian Forces Sleep System, the Canadian Army's been issuing this system since the 60s, surplusing them forever. They've probably made hundreds of thousands of them over the decades. Because of that, they're not just found in Canada. You can find them in the US. Even Survival Russia was able to source one in Russia and did a video on it there. I didn't start into this project thinking I would be able to get all the answers for you guys. I'm actually much more excited to take this idea and throw it out to the community and see what you guys do with it. If you do decide to take one of these on, please post up your work down in the description, link to it somehow, or jump in the Oshawa Bushcraft Facebook group. I'd like to see what you guys come up with. I hope you found this video helpful and informative. I want to thank you guys for watching, and until next time, go outside. YouTube will be here when you get back.